My name is Marianne, and for 25 years I thought I knew what stability meant. I wasn't rich, not glamorous, not even the kind of woman people notice when she walks into a room. But I had a home, a husband, and a life I believed was steady enough to grow old in. I thought loyalty was something you could count on if you gave enough of yourself. I thought love was safe if you nurtured it carefully. That illusion shattered the day I found out my husband had remarried. While I was still alive, still breathing, still clinging to the home we had built together. His new wife, young enough to be my daughter, walked into my life like she owned it, tossing around her manicured nails and diamond jewelry as if she'd earned them. And maybe she thought she had. After all, she had him, my husband, the man who once swore forever to me, wrapped around her little finger. The world calls women like her trophy wives. Pretty faces, polished smiles, glittering accessories meant to shine on a man's arm. That's what she was. What she didn't know was that beneath my plain clothes and quiet nature, I carried something she could never touch. A secret. One that would undo every plan she thought she had for me. But before I tell you what happened, let me take you back to the day it all began. I was in the garden, pruning the roses that my mother planted decades ago. They were stubborn flowers, refusing to bloom unless coaxed with patience and care, much like my marriage had once been. That's when I heard the sound of an unfamiliar car rolling up the driveway, smooth, expensive, far sleeker than anything my husband had ever driven. Out stepped a woman in stilettos, hair glossy like it had been brushed 100 times before she dared leave the house. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't smile. She just handed me an envelope with my name scrawled across it in thick ink. "Marianne," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of confidence only money or delusion can buy. "You have 30 days to vacate this property. It no longer belongs to you." I remember blinking at her, trying to make sense of the words. Vacate. Property. No longer mine. The house I had lived in for 2 decades, where I'd raised my son, where I'd spent nights awake with a feverish child, where I had stitched curtains by hand and polished every floorboard until it gleamed. Suddenly it was being taken away like some borrowed dress overdue at the cleaners. I opened the envelope. Legal papers. A transfer of ownership. My husband's signature at the bottom. Her name Lydia, listed as the new co-owner. My throat burned, but I refused to let tears fall in front of her. "You must be mistaken," I said, though inside I knew she wasn't. My husband's betrayal wasn't new. It had been humming in the background of our lives for years. Late nights at the office. Secretive phone calls. Business trips that stretched longer and longer. I had known, but knowing is different from facing. She tilted her head, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "I don't make mistakes, darling. You can pack your things or have the sheriff escort you out. Either way, this is my home now." I should have felt small in that moment. Weak. Defeated. Instead, something ancient stirred inside me, something she couldn't see. I nodded slowly, tucking the papers back into the envelope. "Very well," I said. 30 days. She smirked, satisfied as though she'd already won. What she didn't know, and what my husband had clearly forgotten, was that the deed to this house carried more than just ink and signatures. It carried a clause, one he'd overlooked. One I had insisted on years ago when I sensed he was the kind of man who might trade loyalty for vanity. But that's a revelation for later. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen. The same kitchen where I'd cooked countless meals, where laughter had once filled the air. Now it felt like a graveyard of memories. I thought about packing my bags, starting over in some small apartment, letting her win. Then I looked at the family photos on the fridge. My son's graduation, my parents' golden anniversary, the dog we buried under the oak tree. And I knew this was not something I would surrender. She had stepped into my life thinking I was powerless. That was her first mistake. Over the next week, she began appearing more often. I'd find her in the living room, rearranging furniture. I'd hear her heels clicking down the hallway, as if she were inspecting her new domain. Once, I walked into my bedroom and found her rifling through my jewelry box, holding up a modest gold bracelet my mother had given me. "Such quaint little things," she said, dropping it back as if it were worthless. "Don't worry, once you're gone I'll redecorate." I forced a smile. "Of course. Do whatever you like." What she didn't realize was that every time she flaunted her victory, she was only giving me more time, more rope to let her hang herself with. Because while she was busy parading around in her designer shoes, I was gathering everything I needed: the documents, the proof, the legal clause that would turn her triumph into ashes. But patience is a game only the underestimated know how to play. Lydia thought she was winning. She strutted through the house as though every wall, every floorboard, every memory belonged to her. She didn't realize that houses have souls, and this one had grown with me, absorbed my struggles, my laughter, my tears. It would never truly belong to her, no matter how many chandeliers she ordered or how many rooms she claimed as her own. But she tried. One evening, I returned from the grocery store to find her in the kitchen, sipping wine from my favorite glass. The audacity of it made me pause. That glass had been a wedding gift, engraved with my initials and my husband's. She knew what she was doing. She wanted to erase me, piece by piece, until there was no sign I had ever existed here. "Back so soon?" she purred, swirling the wine as though it were hers to drink. "I suppose you'll need to start looking at apartments. There's a complex just down the road, though I doubt it's your style." I smiled politely, though inside I seethed. "That's kind of you to worry. But I'll manage." She leaned in, her perfume thick and artificial. "Oh, Marianne, don't make this harder on yourself. Women like you fade. You get old, you get bitter, and then you cling to things that aren't yours anymore. Why don't you just let go?" Her words could have broken me once, but instead, they fueled me. She had no idea that the more she tried to push me out, the stronger my resolve grew. Later that night, I pulled out a locked box from the back of the closet. Inside were documents my husband had long forgotten. The original deed to the house, signed years ago when we purchased it together. Buried in the fine print was a clause I had insisted upon. The property could never be transferred or sold without the written consent of both spouses. My husband might have been careless, but I wasn't. That clause was my lifeline. The next week, my husband finally appeared. He hadn't been around much since introducing Lydia into our lives, but that night, he showed up with his smug grin, his arm draped around her shoulders. "Marianne," he said as though addressing a stranger. "This is awkward for all of us. Lydia and I want a clean start. It's better if you move out quickly with dignity. We'll make sure you're compensated." Compensated. As though my life, my years, my sacrifices were a business transaction. As though being discarded could be softened with a check. I stared at him, the man I had once trusted with everything. "Do you even hear yourself?" I asked quietly. "Do you remember who cooked your meals, who sat by your hospital bed when you had pneumonia, who raised your son while you were too busy chasing your next deal?" His face tightened, but Lydia squeezed his arm, urging him to stand firm. "It's not personal," he muttered. "It's just life." "No," I corrected him. "It's betrayal." They left me stewing in my own house, convinced I would collapse under the weight of their cruelty. But instead of collapsing, I began planning. I visited an old lawyer friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, but who still remembered me fondly. When I showed him the deed and the clause, his eyebrows shot up. "Marianne," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face, "they don't have a leg to stand on. This house is yours as much as it ever was. Any transfer without your consent is void." For the first time in weeks, I exhaled. The secret was real. The power was mine. But rather than confront them immediately, I decided to wait. To let Lydia dig her grave deeper with every insult, every mocking laugh, every smug parade through my home. Because when the truth came out, I wanted it to shatter them completely. And she gave me plenty of ammunition. 2 days later, I caught her hosting a luncheon in the backyard. My backyard. Women from the neighborhood gathered around, marveling at her designer dress, her sparkling rings, her false charm. I listened from the upstairs window as she bragged about her new estate, telling them how she planned to tear out my rose garden and install a swimming pool. They clapped politely, but I saw the sideways glances, the whispers. They knew it wasn't hers. Not really. And yet she basked in the illusion, feeding on their envy like it was oxygen. When the guests left, she found me standing at the edge of the garden, pruning shears in hand. "You really should stop pretending," she said, smirking. Everyone knows you're just lingering, like an old ghost. I clipped another rose, letting the thorn prick my glove. Ghosts, I replied calmly, have a way of haunting. She rolled her eyes and stomped back inside, but my words lingered. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the documents again. It would be so easy to crush her illusion now, to tell her she was nothing but a guest in my home. But I wanted her arrogance to reach its peak. I wanted her to stand on the highest pedestal so that when she fell, the crash would be deafening. And so I waited. Every insult, every smirk, every attempt to erase me became another brick in the wall I was building. Soon, I would pull it down, and it would bury them both. Because what Lydia didn't know, and what my husband had forgotten, is that I wasn't the weak, invisible woman they thought I was. I had power, and when the time came, I would use it in a way they would never forget. The breaking point came on a Saturday evening. Lydia and my husband hosted a small gathering, parading their new life, as though I weren't still rooted in every corner of this house. Neighbors filled the living room, sipping champagne, laughing at Lydia's jokes, nodding as she boasted about the renovations she planned once I was out of the picture. I watched silently from the staircase unnoticed. To them, I was just a shadow, an inconvenience clinging to the walls. But that night, I had chosen my moment. Halfway through the evening, Lydia tapped her glass and called for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," she declared, her voice dripping with triumph, "we are finally moving forward. Soon, this place will be completely ours. A new chapter, a new legacy. Out with the old and with the new." There it was, the arrogance, the audacity. She looked at me as she said it, daring me to object. So I did. I descended the stairs slowly, holding the deed in my hand like a dagger. The room grew quiet, eyes turning toward me. My husband shifted uneasily, but Lydia smirked, certain she could handle me. "I think," I began, my voice steady but carrying through the silence, "you've all been misled." Lydia's smile faltered for the first time. "This house," I continued, holding up the documents, "is not yours. It never was. The deed is in both our names, and according to this clause," I tapped the line with deliberate care, "it cannot be transferred, sold, or claimed without my written consent, which I have not given, which I will never give." A murmur rippled through the guests. Lydia flushed, glancing at my husband for support, but he avoided her gaze. He knew. Deep down, he remembered the clause he had ignored. "You're bluffing," Lydia spat, though her voice shook. "You're just desperate." I handed the papers to the nearest guest, an old neighbor who knew us both well. She adjusted her glasses, read silently, then raised her brows. "It's all here. Clear as day. She's telling the truth." Gasps filled the room. Whispers turned into open stares. Lydia's carefully constructed illusion cracked under the weight of reality. "You see," I said softly, looking directly at her. "You tried to erase me, but you cannot erase the foundation. This house was built with my hands, my sacrifices, my years. You can redecorate the walls, but you will never own its soul." Her face twisted with fury, but the room no longer belonged to her. The audience had seen the truth. My husband finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Marion, please. Don't do this in front of everyone." I turned to him, decades of betrayal condensed into a single look. "You did this to yourself. You let her humiliate me in my own home. You thought I would walk away quietly, but you forgot. I don't break. I endure." He lowered his head. The gathering dissolved quickly after that, guests making excuses to leave, their polite smiles hiding their hunger to gossip about the scandal. Lydia stormed upstairs, slamming doors, but I didn't follow. I didn't need to. Her power was gone. The next morning, she appeared with packed bags, her fury simmering beneath the surface. "This isn't over," she hissed. "Oh, but it is," I replied calmly. "Because from this moment on you're not welcome here. Step out of my house." And she did. My husband lingered, torn between pride and shame. But eventually he followed her, leaving me in the silence of the home I had fought so hard to protect. That silence was not empty. It was full of memories, of strength, of the undeniable truth that I had won. Days later, neighbors came by one. Some brought flowers, others just kind words. We always wondered why she acted as though it was hers, one woman admitted. But you showed such grace, Marianne. You reminded us that dignity doesn't shout. It reveals itself when the time is right. I smiled, thanking them, but inside I carried something deeper. The knowledge that patience and resilience had carried me further than bitterness ever could. The rose garden bloomed brighter that season, as if celebrating with me. I tended to it in the mornings, pruning the thorns carefully, letting the petals unfold under the sun. One afternoon, as I clipped a particularly vibrant rose, I whispered to myself, "Ghosts don't fade. They endure. And sometimes they win." I had been tested, humiliated, nearly erased. But in the end, I remained. Stronger. Unshaken. Unbroken. And that was my secret all along.